Where do we want to kick it off? Because I want to pick it up where we last left off.
That's great. So we were just mentioning off camera too that, all right, so you were episode number 2 when I first started this podcast, and you're back. And this is awesome. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Luke, I'm just so thankful to be here today. We had a really great conversation last time, and I
think we both learned a lot on that one.
We've come a long way. When you were so gracious to have me on the show before, I was in the height of a lot of controversy. I had drawn a lot of attention to myself. It was a very anxious time in our nation. A lot of things have happened since then. Thankfully, I have been blessed to serve the people of Iowa as a representative. We did survive that 2020 election. I thought it was a very interesting contrast that the other guy didn't want to do it, and I really thought it was funny. They used clips from your show and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars making sure that people saw them, although the candidate themselves didn't actually attend your program. So it just shows there's a big difference in people who really want to step up and have these conversations versus people that shy away from the hard topics and people who just plain aren't fit to lead. So again, very thankful for this responsibility. And as I'm learning and growing, hopefully I can do a better job for you and all the people and just being your voice and helping we the people, the community, get to where we want to go and accomplish our goals.
Well, I appreciate that about you. And honestly, because your quick responsiveness to be on the show again, and I find that you're so accessible just in communicating and bumping into one another on the street. And it seems like you take a lot of pride in this.
Well, it is a heavy responsibility. And even I've really thought about the last couple of years a lot, and just realizing when the COVID pandemic really first hit and I was in a position of public leadership, and it's, what position do I have to really, what could I do to really help people, right? Like if there really was a severe disease, like what was the help that people would really need, and could I provide that? Because at that time I was expecting something that was going to be maybe 10 times worse than the flu. I thought a lot of people were going to be very, very intimately affected. Not to downplay the people that have been harmed by this, but a lot of the harms came from government policy. A lot of the COVID sad stories I heard was, I can't see my grandfather as they're passing away. I can't see my relative. I can't see my wife. I had a guy, anyway, even the misdiagnosis, a lot of the medical thing, we've come a long way. That's what I'm trying to say. And there's a lot of really, really important issues on medical freedom. I've been very happy with the work we've been able to do in Iowa. I think securing that reelection for Fairfield has really allowed our community to lead on questions of, should someone be required to take a vaccine as a condition of employment? Should people be required to take a vaccine as a condition of travel? Should people be required to take a vaccine as a condition of a universal basic income for when the economy goes completely topsy-turvy? So these are very, very important legal questions that do strike at a lot of deep-seated human rights issues and who we are as a people and who we are as a society. And we in the city of Fairfield is leading that discussion, not just for Iowa, but the entire nation.
Awesome.
And it's thanks to you.
Oh, well.
Sorry. At least I give a lot of credit because I felt so. I actually revisited a couple of minutes from the previous podcast, and looking at it from 2 years ago, I do cringe at the way I presented and portrayed some things then. And just so much has changed in the refinement and the growth and the realizing how deep these issues are. Like in June 2020, I was just so frustrated. I thought, oh, if I just got really angry and expressed that and kind of not attacked, but just, went after my opponents and was very bold or vocal, that would somehow make things better. I learned that there's better approaches and that it's a very long ball game and these things are very sensitive and delicate. But again, my position is, as a conservative, the world is changing in a lot of radical ways that I do not think are for the better, and that we really need to have a deep, serious conversation of, is this the direction we want society to go? Is this the direction and the environment we want our children to grow up in? And so that's a very important discussion. I'm thankful for not only just podcasts like this, but the election cycle, because this is the theory of our system that, okay, we have elections coming up, the community come together, let's have this discussion on where we want to go, and then let's take a vote. And so at the basic level, my position is just guiding this discussion, figuring out where does the community want to go. And as a leader, my job is to help take the people there. So we'll see how the democratic principles work in the next few weeks. And I would certainly appreciate your vote and the vote of anyone else watching.
Well, that kind of kicks off what my first question was going to be to you, which is basically what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned since being elected? And I'll just preface that by saying, yeah, you were one of my first podcast episodes, and I think we're approaching something like 20 now, and I know how much time and attention those episodes have taken, and it's certainly been a labor of love. But I've learned a lot along the way too, and I'm slowly trying to dial in what we're doing today on this show. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the areas that you grew.
That's an excellent question, and I do really appreciate the podcast episodes, the guests you've had that have focused on that, because growth is a part of life. And if you're not growing, you're dying. And if I'm responding to the problems of 2022 with a 2020 mindset, I'm going to be left in the dust. I mean, things are changing so quickly. Even if from month to month, things are changing so quickly. So growth is essential. I think we grow by taking action and then learning from that action. And that includes making mistakes. But you have to be willing to risk a mistake in order to take an action. And I think a lot of people do not, pursue that next step or that action because there is a fear of failure. I remember I've been hit hard a lot on the campaign trail. I've had some real tough days where I've had to, okay, am I in this? And that's been the moment where I've been able to persevere and why we have accomplished so much politically in such a short time. So being able to take the risk and learn from your mistakes. And I mean, I want to and value this kind of concept of fearlessness. Certainly, it's interesting because fear is important, especially if there's danger. You need to guide yourself into safety. But I think a lot of our fears are illusory or not real or not nearly as bad as you think. So I guess I've just been willing to incur social scorn from, in my opinion, a pretty small segment of the population. But I've been able to make a lot of new friends across the state who, and I hear sometimes, hey, Jeff, you said some things that I think you got it wrong, but gosh, are you willing to go for it? And I just want to provide engagement to people. I think the biggest struggle with politics is how few people are paying attention and how few people are willing to engage. So even when we did the previous podcast, I was so desperate for people to hear my point of view about Bill Gates and, state of medicine and some of these larger questions. And so I would say, hey, okay, can you please just watch the Luke Stenger podcast and let me see how you feel then? And they'd go, okay, fine, I'll watch it. Then they never watched it, So I've had people that I feel like I'm desperate to kind of have to be understood. And not everyone is interested in understanding. But equally, it's a two-way street. I need to understand people's concerns as well. And it's a work in progress, and we're learning.
So what are some of the biggest talking points of your platform? Like what are some of the biggest values that are kind of driving the ship?
Well,
Shipley.
Luke, our society faces a lot of challenges. I think we have a very uncertain future. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I know no matter what, we'll be better off if we work together. So I think that's been very crucial. To actually answer your question straightforwardly, I mean, we're running for office for a lot of serious reasons. I was very concerned that Joe Biden won the presidency. There are a lot of concerns about how that election was conducted, that people still have a lot of lingering doubts. Basically, when a nation has an identity crisis, when you have a symbol like the American flag and a segment of the country says, oh, that's a racist symbol, and the other side of the country says, oh, well, that's a symbol of what I'll fight and die for, that is a schism. When you have married couples divorcing because someone didn't want to submit to a vaccination, that's a pretty deep schism in society if you can tear apart a 30-year marriage over, in my opinion, a relatively minor medical decision. So a lot of people have commented, where's America going from here? What's going to happen? Are people going to have faith in the 2022 elections? Is Trump going to run for? Is Trump going to be allowed back on Twitter? There's just a lot of divisiveness and polarization, and it feels like the nation is being deliberately torn apart. That's how I see it. I study political science. I really take this government stuff really seriously in terms of how, the big picture, empires rising and falling type of thing. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things. I think a lot of people do take things for granted. I think they don't count their blessings. I think they don't say their prayers. I think they don't have a gratitude practice. Those people, there's going to be some stress. And the stress, whether it's financial with inflation or, the financial is really big because that includes rents, food price, childcare, gas, which feeds into everything. There's going to be a lot of financial pressure because chickens have to come home to roost because actions have consequences, and you can't just print money indefinitely and somehow think that it's not going to skew the overall structure of the economy, especially in a way that hurts the working class and those on fixed income and, even the middle class too. Anyone who saves money, anyone who's on a limited income, Social Security, anyone who saves money in the bank, anyone who, bought a government bond or a certificate of deposit at any sort of low interest rate. I mean, they are deliberately wrecking the economy. And I said deliberately, that's how I see it, because you'd have to be really, really stupid. And that's the thing, the media treats people as they're really, really stupid. A year ago, they're like, we don't expect to see inflation from this. That's what the experts said. So just God have mercy on anyone who believes anything the media says, especially when it relates to, global financial news and what's really happening. I'm on the current understanding that the face value of a nickel is 5 cents is less than the actual metallic content of the nickel and copper within there. So we can't afford nickels anymore. So you might be a rich man if you just stack nickels, and you'll be well prepared for the new Bronze Age when the federal government ceases to. I mean, the general theory is that the government would never default on their obligation. They would just print more money. The concern now, especially so, Russia apparently is stopping energy or power to Finland. And so Finland's wanting to get admitted to NATO. And there's been a lot of historic, wars over Finland and Russia. So there's a lot of hot spots. The energy economies thing. The big thing is to look out for is what currency are you using to trade in oil? So the Russia requiring rubles for the payment of their oil is actually a big kind of geopolitical shift of the global world balance. And I think, maybe we have a very high Q population. So there might be as many as 10% of the population here, the Protect Freedom Committee, that understands this stuff. But by and large, your average American, average Iowan do not totally comprehend the forces at play when they are buying food from the supermarket or pumping up their gas at Casey's. And so it's going to get bad, because if people don't understand the problem, things get a lot worse.
So, I mean, what would you characterize as being some of the biggest challenges for us in the state of Iowa?
I mean, there's a lot of ways I could characterize this. America, unfortunately, under the direction of Joe Biden or his handlers or the globalists, they're going in a direction that, is not good. They do not want America to be powerful. They want us to be equal partners on the world stage. That means we're going to reduce our quality of life. And some people think, okay, we want to deliberately make fossil fuels more expensive to expedite the transition to green energy. So that's why when people are complaining about price of gas, you do see some liberals just kind of scoffing at it and saying, oh, it's not so big deal. You made a wrong choice, so you deserve to pay more. So there is that kind of dismissal attitude. But so Iowa, we have a lot of the same problems as the blue states. And God help the blue states, because there's a lot of bad things that have been happening in a lot of places. And thank God we live in Iowa. I've been very vocal on that. But we have a lot of the same problems the blue states have. We just have them a little bit less. So we still did lose nursing workforce because of vaccine mandates issues, because we wrote a pretty good state law, but it wasn't ironclad. And these hospital networks did not want to employ these nurses, and they felt they could not accommodate their religious views. And so we still have a lot of these problems. The public schools, basically, you can tell the health of your society by the health of your children. And if your children are chronically ill, if your children have identity disorders, if your children can't communicate or read, that's going to be a real big challenge in the future.
Like, the research is finally starting to come out on what that did to kids who maybe weren't seeing, mouths or speaking, or all the weirdness that came along with that.
Delays in speech development, and actually kind of shifting that calendar back. So, okay, these milestones that were at 18 months, now we're going to say they're at 24 months. 50%, over half of third graders in the Des Moines public schools cannot meet the benchmark proficiency for reading. Now, this is really important because the public schools spend a lot of taxpayer money. It's a huge investment we pay annually. And reading is one of those basic life skills that it's great if everyone can do it. And the more you read, the better equipped you are to handle life in a lot of different dimensions. Reading is great. And being able to read proficiently should be what our public schools are producing. But yeah, Des Moines was one of the harshest school districts on kids. They wanted to keep kids out of the classroom as long as possible. And then as soon as they got it, and that's the thing, people are like, oh, wearing a mask isn't a big deal. Okay, it might not be a big deal for you to wear a mask for a half an hour or an hour when you go into Walmart or your doctor's appointment, but making a kid wear a mask for 4 hours at a time over the course of like an 8-hour day with little breaks, and then having strict enforcement on a kid, and then having kids are not the most hygienic and they get into things, and then that dirt accumulates around the respiratory passage. I was so stunned by how many negligent adults did not realize the distinctions. And, oh, a mask is no big deal. I can wear a mask when I'm on a flight on an airplane, so the kids in school should wear them too. Okay, but the kids are in school every single day, and you're making them wear them outside. And there was jurisdictions in this country where they wanted kids to eat lunch outside in the cold in the name of health. So we had this stuff in Iowa too, where they wanted to put plexiglass barriers in between the kids. All sorts of crazy stuff. I mean, the whole return to learn thing, I got in trouble. I had a quote. The full quote was, I don't know what these teachers are doing. I said the word idiot, and then, oh, they're ideologically motivated. They took the 4-second clip, and I paid a good political price for it, and they spent a lot of money on it. It was from another podcast, but the clips from your podcast are great. This was so crazy because it was so stupid, because this was someone, it was really just kind of connecting with a friend. It was this woman, Joni Abbott, out of the Quad Cities area. She's just a health freedom person out there. She just wanted some content about how crazy COVID was being. And I talked about, so what the teachers were doing that triggered that, the teachers were writing their fictionalized obituaries, sending them to the governor and saying, I don't want to go to school. You can't make me go to school. If you make me go to school and do my job that I'm being paid for to do, you're killing me essentially. And it's going to be your fault that I die of this respiratory virus, which is, so unbelievably deadly that I'm so scared in writing my obituary. So I said that was pretty idiotic because they were using kids as props. It was deliberate fear propaganda. Think how the kids feel too. It's like, oh, I don't want to go to school. I'll put my teacher at risk. Well, none of that was true. None of that was scientific. That was known early on during the pandemic. Governor DeSantis would quote this study out of Iceland. He's like, we knew from April that schools were not going to be an issue with this, either in the transmission or just the severe effects on the kids. Everything that's been talked about COVID illness, even from the American Academy of Pediatrics on long haul COVID in kids, totally exaggerated, totally only in kids with severe pre-existing conditions. Again, it's overwhelming. Even the CDC has admitted they don't have a single death of a kid from COVID under 16 that they can confirm. So it was overblown. We overreacted and children's health suffered. Even in our community, when they did their stay away from school plan, the school board did that. And the Jefferson County Health Center was on the meeting, and they said, hey, our employees, our doctors and nurses that are, trying to take care of the elderly people and make sure we're good to go, it really helps them if their kids can go to school during the day. Otherwise, they're very, very scared about what their kids could be getting up to, or that they can't find childcare, or it's a big burden. We heard that from all the school districts. It's very difficult for parents, especially when a district would announce something on the drop of a hat. So what happened in Fairfield is they announced one return to learn plan. Then they changed their mind in a closed door meeting about 5 days later, and they took parents by surprise, and the school date was coming up. So it's like, okay, how many days do you have to plan for your childcare? Well, not very many in Fairfield because the school district's just flying off the handle. And then the hospital, as far as local authorities, I would say Governor Reynolds, State Representative Shipley, then obviously our local hospitalists and stuff. They're a pretty high authority on who you should be listening to in terms of responding to a health crisis. And the school district didn't want to listen to them. So at what point are you just refusing to be a community partner and doing so because you're playing games on some agenda? Because, and I hate to say it, I think a lot of people have good intentions. Obviously, if you're a teacher and you're worried about your health, get first in line for the vaccine if that's what you want to do. But you can't put that responsibility on children, and you also can't expect to be paid and sit home at work. And so the way we've incentivized people to take advantage of the worst human impulses, and this is the whole thing, the woe is me. Oh, I'm such a victim. How dare you pick on me? Like, you're so shameless to insist that you deserve to get paid to stay home. And wait, that was more like the full cancel. I know they did do a lot of remote learning, but there is that kind of mentality in government of I deserve to be paid and I'm not going to contribute a whole lot.
How would we approach schools? How would you approach schools differently?
So the big thing right now is there's a log jam over the governor's school choice proposal. I've always been a big supporter of school choice. This is basically the concept of allowing students to access the financial resources more directly Rather than funding the institution, you allow a revenue stream to get more directly to the kid. This is important because there's a lot of diversity in our children, and there's a lot of diversity in education and what parents want. And it's very, very tough to provide one public school that satisfies everyone to the fullest extent. So this is what we want. I mean, to maximize happiness in society, you want as many people as possible to get as much as they want as possible. And so you need options. So the school choice, essentially, if you look at pupils per dollar, you do that division equation, roughly it amounts to $18,000 per pupil annually in your public school. Now that's going to be a collection of the state appropriation, of your local property tax, of the sales tax component, of the income tax, of federal funds, even other fundraising grants, that type of thing. Big influx of federal money. So it's not $18,000 straight cash, just kind of siloed off with different rules that, you can only spend this on the building. But this is interesting too. Having school finance be flexible, because there was a moment in time where all of a sudden our school infrastructure, the physical buildings, were a lot less necessary, yet, you still have to silo this money here. So anyway, the point is there's a lot of money on the table. It's how do we allocate those resources to how they're best spent to create that happiness and satisfy taxpayers, because this money is not coming out of thin air. It's the government, through the, whatever social contract, is extracting these resources out of us every time we make a purchase, every time we want to live in our home, and, et cetera, et cetera. So this money is big, and there's a lot of it. So the school choice is, they look at the state cost per pupil, which this year is going to be $7,200, and that's what follows the student. So if you had a young kid enrolled in Fairfield and then they go to a different school, Fairfield loses that state cost per pupil because that follows to the institution. So we just wanted it would follow to another public institution. We would just want to follow it to the kid more directly if they went to a non-public institution. Competent private instruction is the phrase in law of what most people think these funds should qualify for. Independent private instruction would be a pure form of homeschooling. People haven't wanted to cross that frontier yet. So like for the new micro schools that have kind of popped up that aren't accredited, they wouldn't necessarily purely benefit from this, but the concept of getting more choice in education and providing an avenue, financial resources. The other thing is big. Who would benefit the most from this are kids in the inner city, the Des Moines School District, which I already talked about, where if you're a parent and saying, oh my gosh, my kid can't read, and he's in Des Moines schools and he can't read because they're not letting him show up to school or whatever. I want to take my kid somewhere else, but I'm on a fixed income. And I just wish my child had every opportunity as the private school that's not making them wear masks, because I know this mask is debilitating him and he hates it and he cries about it. So this is where you could really level the playing field, where this inner city kid on a lower income would have the same opportunity as an upper middle class person. And access to financial resources is a huge predictor of academic success. And so we want every child to make sure they have roughly equitable access to the same financial resources. That's the goal of the policy. The opponents say they don't want any money being allocated outside of public schools, that we already have some tax credits that people can deduct from their taxes, and that should be sufficient. But there's a lot of parents that are desperate for this. And thankfully, Governor Reynolds, I really appreciate her digging in on this. I'm not sure what will happen this legislative session. That's still an unanswered question. But I've been very thankful that at least most of the Republican Party has been addressing this as a priority issue.
What were some of your biggest successes? What would you say were some of your hallmark?
Like, to me, it's like the highlight reel. I love the Iowa starting line. Like, looking back on 2020 when they wrote that article about me, on the speech I gave, and how a lot of the things I said kind of came true and ended up being kind of standard Republican boilerplate talking points. So I've been very thankful to be on the front lines on a lot of issues. Probably being by Governor Reynolds' side on May 20th of last year, when she signed that ending the mask mandates in public schools. Should have happened a few months before, but she has to wait on the legislature for that sort of thing. But being there where there was a lot of joy, literally, that kids got to wake up in the morning and say, oh, by state law, you don't have to wear a mask anymore. And we were flooded with wonderful stories of, hey, our classroom, people enjoyed it. The teachers were so thankful. How wonderful it was to see the smiles of their children before they left for the summer, because they hadn't seen that all year. And imagine spending that long of a time with someone and not really being intimate with their smile. And so much is conveyed in the face. So that was really, really wonderful. Again, I felt very vindicated. by getting the vaccine exemption law done, protecting medical and religious exemptions for COVID-19 vaccinations in workplaces, and really was on the front line of that discussion too, and called it. And my fellow Republican colleagues were wrong. They were telling the public things that weren't true, and I was proven right. And it was actually really important. This is in July when these things were first starting to pop off. I told the Speaker of the House on the phone, I was like, well, when I'm looking at this policy, as long as they honor religious and medical exemptions as appropriate, I think that would be a good way to go. I think that would, and that's exactly what happened 3 months after that. So to be there when a conversation I had with the Speaker and a lot of political jockeying later, because we did convene in October and in the first week of October and got nothing done when there was 400 angry Iowans banging on us at the Capitol. And then to see that, like, wow, I had a conversation with the Speaker of the House at the end of July. We talked with a lot of Iowans and visited a lot of hospitals and protest in August and September. And then boom, at the end of October, the day before a lot of these nurses and caseworkers were going to get fired, they had their religious exemptions approved. So that was very, very satisfying on the medical freedom front because, it was just such a big ordeal. So I was very thankful for those experiences and getting that done.
For whatever opposition you have, and the people that maybe don't understand you, what is it you think they're not getting, or what is, if you could like steel man it, like what are the biggest arguments against you in what you're doing?
Well, so I honestly don't know. I think I'm pretty rock solid, and to the extent.
Nice.
But okay.
That sounds like a real politician type answer. I don't want to grill you too hard, but
well, no. So, so this is how I see it, and you can kind of give me your perspective.
Yeah, sure.
For opponents, there's just so much gap in the perception that we see in the world. It's really this kind of living in separate universes, and that's why I'm really concerned about this whole kind of Civil War kind of discussion, or Texas wants to secede, and okay, the United States is going to break up. Because there are people that are just living in a total different universe. And so for me, that really highlighted this was the discussion on critical race theory. Do you have any existing understanding of the term critical race theory?
Gosh, I'll be honest. I don't have a totally solid understanding of that term.
And that's so this kind of proves. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
So it's very difficult to have a conversation about something if there's not a clear understanding of what we're talking about. So I've noticed when I comment about critical race theory, such as the critical race theory text that was in 8th grade schools, a lot of these left-leaning Biden-type people, they think that these are just pure books that are teaching the Tulsa race riots and that slavery was a lot more evil than maybe we thought, and that it's really bad that the Constitution listed black people as 3/5 of a person for that compromise. They think they literally are equating it to one, they'll say a couple of things. They'll say it's just American history and you are a white supremacist. They'll say that. You say you're a white supremacist who doesn't want kids to know the true history of this country. That's one thing they'll say. The other thing that I've heard said is we're not teaching critical race theory. It's something that's for law classes and and that kind of thing, which is weird because if they aren't teaching it, then why do they care if we ban it? The bill that we passed, House File 802, addressed divisive concepts, and some of those divisive concepts would be all white people are racist, because that's a broad, generalized, sweeping statement about a whole group of people that you have no idea, because there could be a lot of white people that have really pure hearts and never harmed a soul, and you just haven't met them yet, so that statement's false,
And I hesitate to bring it up, but the whole idea of like white privilege, I do as much acknowledge that exists on some level. You and I got to benefit from,
arguably. Privilege exists. I'd say my biggest privilege was I had 2 parents that really loved me and invested in me. That was a huge privilege. Going back to financial resources being a key academic of academic success, a huge indicator of success in life. So if you're a poor white person, you're arguably having a disadvantage compared to a black family that's a little bit more well off and can send you to a school that's maybe a little bit better that doesn't make you wear a mask. So there's a lot of dynamics of privilege. Good-looking people are very privileged. Every person is beautiful as long as they're living a truthful expression of themselves. But there are people that get further along in life because they carry themselves and they have a great look and they're attractive. But there's a lot of unpredictable random events that can dictate the privilege you have in life.
Yeah, so I guess the question too becomes like, okay, so what is a complete education, right? Like how much up to speed, if it's in the past.
Well, so here's the actual critical, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, okay, so like if it happened in the past, maybe it's not so true today. Does that mean we're going to teach it? I'm just putting this out there hypothetically.
Well, you brought up white privilege. So this is the critical race theory question. What percent of your success is due to your white privilege? What percentage of your income would need to be taxed as a white privilege tax to remediate that racism in society? This is what critical race theory instructs, is how much of your success is due to your white privilege that definitely exists, and by denying it exists proves you're a racist. And then how are you going to remediate that? And so when you have a prominent critical race theorist like Ibram X. Kendi, who says the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, they're advocating for racial discrimination. That's why if I go to one of these woke teachers and I said, hey, when I was in kindergarten, my kindergarten teacher taught me the words of Martin Luther King, that we need to judge everyone by the color of the content of their heart and not the color of their skin. And that's the dream that I have for my children, that they'll be judged on that content of their character. And that's what Martin Luther King's dream was. So yeah, there's a lot of things that happened in the past. I think the way we unify is we look at everyone as the best version of themselves as we can, and we work to address the present injustices that work in the world, and we do a lot less litigating of things that might have happened in 1619 or in 1860. So if I'm to do my job well, I am to help provide a space for the entire community to come together, decide where that community wants to go, and then help them get there. And there's a lot of big topics, and there are, life is hard. The biggest thing that I'm trying to wrap my mind around is the presentation of gender identity curriculum in schools, and the idea that a school district could exclude a parent from knowing something about their kid. So that's a very amorphous area. And actually at the legislative forum, one of the school board members kind of said, and I had to agree that, even with critical race theory, it's how it's taught, and making sure that as long as a kid is not marked points because he doesn't have as long as the kid's being graded based on his ability to articulate his position rather than espousing a particular point of view over another, then that's not indoctrination. But at least for this, the gender identity where you conceal things from parents, that's a very bright red line that everyone should be able to recognize.
Yeah, explain that to me. I'm just out of the loop. So what is it?
So this has been kind of in the weeds for a while, and it is in this realm of civil rights law. So the Linn-Mar School District, as a matter of policy, now says that if a seventh grader wants to, they have priority. Once a student's a seventh grader, they have priority over their gender plan. Their gender plan includes their name, their gender expression, how they dress, the pronouns they use, the locker rooms they use, who they would stay with on overnight accommodations. So that's totally in the student's control. And the policy is once a student says, I want to change my name or pronouns, within 10 days, the school has to have that totally updated in their systems, and they don't question the kid. And then once the student's in seventh grade, the school district would need permission from the child to tell the parents. So the best practice, I would say, if a student comes to a teacher and says, hey, I want to be known as this, or I want to dress like a cat, as a furry, the teacher should say, do your parents know about this? Are your parents okay with this? That should be the first thing the teacher should say. She's like, oh, what do your parents feel? Are your parents okay with me calling you Stephanie? Because I don't want to do it if your parents aren't okay with it, because that might make them mad. And your parents are your parents. That's what I would really like to see educators say. I think there are some educators saying that. But the policy of the Linn-Mar School District now is to say, okay, I'm going to keep this from your parents. You can tell me, and you can tell me anything, and I'll make sure it doesn't go to your parents. And it's really, really weird, too, because nowhere in this policy is a mental health evaluation required. So it's literally at the kid's sole discretion. And so just imagine you're a parent and you find out that, oh, your son Steven has been Stephanie at school for the last month. How would a parent feel about that? And again, I have not had anyone explain to me yet how this could ever be possibly healthy, that a young child could be one identity at home and a different identity expression at school, and having some sort of block between those things. How could that ever be healthy on a young kid who's forming their identity, that they're this person, they're Stephen at home, Stephanie in school. How is that healthy under any scenario? I don't understand that.
I'm kind of curious, like how many kids is this actually impacting?
Enough that they have to make official policy to accommodate them.
Yeah. And then I'm just trying to wrap my head around it too. So per the policy, is this to assume that the kid is, this is like some sort of safe haven for the kid away from what could be an abusive household or something?
That's what they would say, that it would be the school district's responsibility to protect the kid from their parents.
Yeah. So, because I can only imagine if a kid is struggling with this and they're trying to, coming out's probably hard enough, or whatever the circumstances are. And I don't know, would they do that to the school before doing that to their parents? I wonder, maybe under certain circumstances. Or
a lot of this is socially driven, as some people think. So if your friend group at school is going in this direction and you want to fit in with your friend group at school, that oftentimes can be attributed as a motivation for some of these decisions. It's very difficult. I mean, knowing who you are in the world, your meaning, your purpose, especially around, puberty, things are very complicated. Who are you in the world? How do you show up? Being a child is very tough. It's gotten a lot harder for a number of reasons over the last few years. And so there are a lot of children that have these questions. They don't know who they are. What is their identity? And I think this is kind of a false stopgap solution that provides maybe some temporary gratification. And that's the thing, most children will grow out of this. And that was how the therapy used to be kind of managed, where, okay, if someone really insists on this, you do your best to manage it, you do your best to management, okay, and then it would be by the time they're 18, if they really wanted to go forward, then you would hand them off to, a surgeon that could help them take whatever those next steps are. So, but there was at least that you wouldn't necessarily affirm them as a therapist. You would need them to affirm themselves socially, and you would really put the ball in their court, and you would just kind of be a guardrail to make sure they don't do anything rash. That was kind of the old kind of wait and see approach for these individuals, which we're very far and few between. But there was an established kind of scientific protocol, because this is not a new phenomenon. It was within the last 100 years. So, and there's a lot of debate about anthropologically how these things might have been presented in different societies. I don't know if there's a lot of hard evidence or things. I don't necessarily believe everything I hear on that. But so, yeah, that was how it used to be, is, okay, you really don't like your body, you feel like you need to be the other sex. All right, just, don't kill yourself, just wait and see. Okay, call yourself a woman in public and dress that way, see how it makes you feel. Now it's you affirm the person and you say, oh yeah, you think you're a girl? Well, go ahead. I affirm you. I'm going to call you whatever you want me to. And I affirm you as you, because I respect your social, emotional learning. And the last thing I want to do is offend you. And I accept you no matter what you are. No matter how unbearable or unaccommodating you're insisting on being, or no matter what boundaries or other people's personal boundaries you want to cross, I accept you as you are, because this is the trans affirmative method. And we purged all the old school people like Dr. Kenneth Zucker and all the other endocrinologists that really studied this for decades. We're moving in this new direction, affirmative only, affirmative only. If the kid says they are a different gender, the school district will comply and will accommodate them. No questions asked, no parents notified. That's the policy.
Wow. Yeah. It's super interesting. It's also, I don't know, it's super gray, this area.
Well, it's the imposition of your will on others. So this is very interesting. So the word compassion is to suffer with. So if someone is truly suffering, if they need help getting their feet grounded in the world to figure out what's going to make them a meaningful, fulfilled person, where they look in the mirror and they love what they see, I will be with you during your suffering. But I will not agree to conform the world to your suffering. You need to be independently mentally healthy. Your mental health shall not be dependent on the actions of others, let alone the actions of an entire school district or the entire country. So people need to be independently mentally healthy. I got in trouble because I did use the term mental illness in a somewhat provocative way. And I do maintain this position that health is health and illness. And if you're a young, for example, 14-year-old boy, biological boy, and you believe you are legally entitled to participate on the women's track team, and the failure to allow you to run with the girls' track team as a boy will result in you taking harmful action against yourself or others, or suicidal ideations or chronic depression, whatever the symptomology is, you're not mentally healthy, and letting you run with the girls is not going to permanently alleviate that, because there's going to become a time in life where girls track isn't available. And that's the other big thing too with the treatments and how some of these therapies work, where, are you just trading one symptomology for another, an addiction? And what happens when you can't afford the treatment that you were depending on, whether that was a puberty blocker or a cross hormone, and then the suicidal ideations return or whatever. And these are expensive therapies. And why did the therapist get you on a course of therapy that you couldn't financially complete? Were there other options? So there's a lot of these questions. But the big thing is is it my civil right to make my employer or the state of Iowa's insurance pay for mastectomy to accommodate my gender dysphoria? I mean, that's a legitimate issue that is being debated in the courts. And can a 16-year-old girl have permission to undergo a mastectomy for a gender dysphoria? I mean, so how does the role of minors consenting to potentially permanently irreversible operations, how does the law say about that? These are questions that a lot of people are interested in, because these issues are coming, and because people are introducing these concepts. People are insisting on introducing these concepts to children. They are saying children need access to cross hormone therapies prior to puberty, because if a transgender individual goes through puberty on their opposite sex, then that's going to cause them emotional harm. So I need to make sure every kid, as a matter of policy, knows about this, just in case that they're transgender. And then, I mean, the whole thing, like a lot of this compared to bulimia and how these things are socially contagious. So when the media started doing a lot of reporting on bulimia, you saw a lot more cases of bulimia. When the school district, as a matter of policy, puts in their curriculum all this gender queer stuff, you're going to see more gender queer stuff appear in people. It's not hard to discern. And yes, the rates of incidents are rising. And for the young population, it seems to affect young women more than boys. So that's a start on some of the things that are really urgent to the state of Iowa. And again, these are in Iowa. These are official policies of school districts. They're saying they have to do this for the Iowa Civil Rights Code. So if they're correct in that interpretation, that would apply to every school district, public, non-public in Iowa, and potentially in a lot of other areas of public accommodation and things of that nature too. So these are very, very powerful laws.
Yeah, they sure are. And should we talk about women's rights a little bit, where you fall on that?
Yeah, so Roe versus Wade has been the Supreme Court ruling from 1973. All these people that are supposedly my body, my choice, bodily autonomy did not say a word when the state of New York was dismissing healthcare workers by the thousands for wanting to maintain their bodily autonomy. So there's a lot of interesting kind of contradictions that I notice. How the law would stand in Iowa is right now there was a Supreme Court ruling which did recognize a constitutional right to abortion in Iowa. What the pro-life advocacy is trying to do, and I support this, is they want it's what they call the Life Amendment. It would be a constitutional amendment where all it would say is that there is not an implicit right to abortion in the Constitution, because genuinely there's not. When you read the Iowa Constitution, it doesn't mention abortion. So the fact that a Chief Justice in Iowa Supreme Court was able to extrapolate this, and it was in striking down the heartbeat laws, how this ruling happened in 2018. So that would be the reigning case law in Iowa. We want to put this Life Amendment and just say that the Constitution does not say that, because if it is in the Constitution, that would necessitate taxpayer-funded abortion, a lot of other things. If it's really a constitutional right, is a constitutional right up until the moment of birth. So it is important to clarify. The benefit of this constitutional amendment process is it puts the power directly in the hands of the people of Iowa to write the Constitution for themselves. So the way the process works is it goes through 2 general assemblies. So we did it here for 2021, 2022. We passed the resolution again for 2023, 2024. Then it appears on the 2024 ballot for the people of Iowa to take an up and down vote, and then boom, the law of the land in Iowa will be what the people decided through their democratic ballot. I think that's a beautiful process. I also believe that life begins at conception. I believe that's the biological reality, because when the sperm meets the egg, there's a bioluminescence, which signifies the creation of life. And so biologically speaking, I do believe life begins at that point. And I was always taught from my grandparents and my parents that at that life of conception, we want to value that so it's deserving of legal protection. I understand not everyone shares that view. I did a survey of my constituents, and the people who filled my survey probably sway in my direction. I think we had maybe 60% of people at life begins at conception. So there is a lot of differences of opinion on when that should be, but I definitely do believe in a firm time, with the only possible exception being for the health of the mother when the unborn life is protected. I think there is something that deserves legal protection. I think if you murder a pregnant woman, I think you've killed two people. So I think a lot of people look down upon women who drink while they're pregnant or smoke cigarettes while they're pregnant or maybe engage in dangerous activity. Like, I think there is a broad segment of perception that, yes, there's a life within there that needs to be taken care of. And so I just think it deserves legal protection. I think biologically, life begins at conception. We've had the heartbeat law that did the Supreme Court thing. There's a lot of people. We'll see how that process plays out. The most important thing that I feel we can really collaborate on, and we should reach broad agreement on this, is no matter the woman, if she's pregnant, she needs to know that if she decides to bring that baby into this world, it'll be met with love and understanding and compassion, and be giving everything it's need from a dedicated education savings account from the state of Iowa to make sure their education expenses are paid for, to the, we're out of baby formula right now, so it's going to be tough. But that would be the world that I would really want to work on and prioritize creating, that I think is more important than the actual legal question, is making sure that every child is brought forth in love, and that every mother knows this child is going to be loved, not by me, but by this wonderful God-loving society that we live in, that we really truly support one another. We understand one another. We adopt Christian values of non-judgment and realize a lot of, situations that need compassion and forgiveness. And so that would be what I really, really want to create, because I think pro-choice people do have a legitimate concern. And I think that does drive this idea. Well, one, I think there is a little bit of a psychopathy that, oh, this baby's inconvenient, so I'm going to abort it. But I think there's also a lot of abortions that occur because the mother would want to have the baby. They just, their husband didn't want to do it. Or maybe their husband is pressuring them, or their boyfriend or whatever is pressuring them into the abortion because he doesn't want to pay for that. Or that just, they already have a handful of children that they're struggling with, and they feel like this one is, going to stretch the paycheck too much. That, I think, is the real tragedy. Those are the lives I most want to save. I think it's kind of portrayed or glamorized in a way that it really shouldn't be. So Bill Clinton used to say, keep abortion safe, legal, and rare. Now it's just safe and legal. But my concern is a lot of this stuff isn't really safe, because when you look at the easy access of abortion pills, well, that can cause harm to women if they're not properly supervised by a physician. And this is what we have, where if you're an Iowa woman, you could order an chemical abortion pill through telemedicine, have it delivered to your door, and then it's not required that a physician check up on you and make sure you don't have any hemorrhaging or clotting or anything really unpleasant. And the chemical abortion, it is not always as easy as the industry might make it seem, that it is traumatic. And then also, so I don't think some of these things are safe. And then when it comes to human sex trafficking, and we want to talk about injustice, there are still a lot of human trafficking at the southern border right now. A lot of it's sex trafficking. They talk about I-80 and I-35. We are a crossroads of the nation. I mean, you better believe there's human sex trafficking operating in Iowa and using motels for seedy things. And if they have easy access to chemical abortion, they could really use that to do harmful things to women. So it doesn't seem to be rare anymore, and then it's questionable if this stuff is even safe or legal. So, where is that public consensus that, hey, if we're going to condone this in society, we need to have some really, really strict boundaries on when it can't happen. But I've always just been fascinated that this is a policy question that goes back thousands of years in Western civilization. I believe they debated this stuff in ancient Rome and certainly in the early days of the church. So there's a lot to the human sexuality element in terms of just, again, I think that's one of the big things that I think human beings in general need to get a better handle on. And why I do like some of these kind of Eastern philosophies is how the human energetic system does come up, from the sexual organs and sexual glands. And that is your creative power in a way. And you have to take responsibility for creation. And sex is sacred. And it should be taught that sex is sacred, that this is the power to create a human being. And that baby inside you is a human being. It has its own DNA. It has its own plan that God wrote out every day of its life for. So it's just an infinite potential that I think we'd at least want to honor or dignify in some way and just hopefully allow everyone to make the best decision for everyone. So there's a lot of ways to cut it. The chemical abortion stuff, I did put my foot down pretty hard on banning chemical abortion pills because what the Joe Biden administration did to make those more available, I was not comfortable with, and I think women deserve protection.
I wanted to ask you a broader question too, because it seems to be kind of your slogan. It's on all your signs. It's the protect freedom, and I'm just curious, what does that mean to you? Yeah,
that's a wonderful question. So I think freedom should be the fundamental organizing structure of society. So I think the more we can agree to disagree on complicated issues, such as,
like abortions. I mean, shouldn't a woman? Again, I'm just
the question on abortion is going to be jurisdiction. So you're still going to have very easy, immediate access to abortion in Virginia, Colorado, New York, California, Illinois. Over half the country is still going to and is moving towards this 36-week abortion or this proposal for abortion after birth because. Again, like when does human life begin and when is human life expendable? That is just the legal framework that exists in a post-Roe world. So that's just how it's going to be. And it's interesting. So when Texas did a heartbeat bill, Oklahomans complained that, a bunch of Texans are coming up to Oklahoma for abortion. So we outlawed abortion completely. There is a lot of that sentiment in, the Christian Midwest. So, those people have their right to the ballot box and they have elected representatives and they're going to exercise their political power. So I don't claim to have a perfect solution to abortion. That's why I say prayers. That's why if I ever have the chance to participate in a 40 Days for Life event where people have saved a lot of lives. There's amazing stories of people who camped outside of abortion clinics and helped women connect to different choices. There's an amazing movement of women who are leaving the abortion industry because they were concerned with how a lot of these issues are being dealt and addressed. Again, that is this really truly the best choice for a particular woman at this particular time. So I'm not going to be the judge of that just as a lawmaker. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this evolves. And again, what the best legal framework is. But this is the thing about freedom. So in that sense, this idea to agree to disagree, is it really reasonable that every 50 states in the union need the same abortion laws? Is that the best system for collaborative governance? As an Iowan, should I advocate through Congress to stop abortions in Virginia? Do I have a moral right to do that? Some people would argue yes, because it's murder and they don't want to be a part of any union that condones murder. Other people might just be happy to live in Iowa and be able to write their own laws and not get in other people's business. But that was a big thing with why society is being divisive. And people accused me of being divisive because I wouldn't wear a mask at a certain place or because I said how I truly felt about vaccine issues. Or published scientific data, which maybe contradicted some of the vaccine narrative. So people would accuse me of being divisive. But truly, the division is coming from the person who imposes the mandate, because the social harmony exists when we can agree to disagree. Because, okay, if you want to wear a mask because you think that's the best decision for you, that's wonderful. But, I don't want to get acne on my face and I don't think it does anything. Plus, I know for a fact that I'm not sick and I'm not going to allow anyone to. So if you can respect myself and affirming my health by not wearing a mask, I can respect your decision to wear a mask and I'll be happy to stay 6 feet away from you. But tolerance and respect is a two-way street. And when you remove that by saying, well, no, it's the rule and you can't come in here and I'm not going to give you an oil change and I'm not going to let you shop groceries here and I'm not going to let you have a job here because it's a mandate and you have to comply. We're no longer agreeing to disagree. It's agree or else. That causes a lot of division. So freedom is allowing that social harmony to flourish. Freedom is the ability for each person to determine what is best for them, to tap their own unique creative potential through self-exploration, this country was founded on religious liberty, the idea that anyone could come to this country. They could leave behind the Church of England. They could leave behind the Catholic Church, and they could find God and connect to God as they wanted to in complete freedom. That was revolutionary, a revolutionary rejection of the old world priest class. So religious liberty is completely fundamental because we are, divine beings created in the image and likeness of God. So I think part of life really is finding that active connection with the power that creates all things. So religious liberty is crucial. And then again, finding God and fulfilling God's purpose is, I think, equivalent to finding your life's greatest joy. So I think that is in summary, my view of freedom and making sure that one person's exercise of freedom in no way interferes with the life of another. And some people believe that life of another could include an unborn child, depending on a certain stage of development.
Yeah, and laws are just kind of peculiar in general because they are blanket statements for society. So, yeah, it's a hard line to walk, especially when you're talking about schools. Okay, what are we going to teach kids in school,
Well, so we have a common law system. So we solve complicated legal questions by looking at the past and trying to apply rulings from similar situations in the past. But when you have a novel virus and a health emergency on a scale like we've never seen, or a scale like the media never reported before, or these new identity issues where transgender technically existed back in 1970, but I didn't truly exist the way it did today. So things have changed and are rapidly accelerating. Certainly with the advent of technology, the law becomes increasingly unclear the further away you get from established cases. So a lot of this, you need to lawyer up, duke it out, and decide who knows the law better or has the most money to call in expert witnesses and convince a judge or a jury. They're going to have a tremendous advantage in asserting their case. So that's really one of the big problems, is the law being able to respond to social changes. And then again, when it is ambiguous, that's where you see a lot of that division, because that was actually kind of fun, where as soon as employees started pushing back against their employers and the employers realized that, the law's not as sturdy as maybe I thought, they started backing down quite a bit. And that was really beautiful, that it really just took people asserting their rights and standing up for themselves to get something done. A good example of this is, so we did the mask mandate ban bill, which allowed kids to smile in school again. And a federal judge struck it down on a very arbitrary and capricious reason, but he's a federal judge, so we have to do what he says. So the mask mandate came back in Fairfield, and the district was smart enough to have a religious exemption form that said, okay, if you don't want to wear a mask because it violates your sincerely held beliefs, well, you're still entitled to an education, so we have to accommodate you. So they had the forms, and then later that day, the superintendent called all the parents who filled out the form and said they're not going to honor the request. So it was very interesting how something changed from the morning to the afternoon, and then the superintendent said, don't send your kid to school if they're not wearing a mask. But then when the kid did show up at school not wearing a mask, the school district really can't turn them away. So there's a lot of words, and you can really just poke through these people and say, no, I'm legally entitled to an education, and my religious views are legally protected in education in the state of Iowa and the United States of America. And so it's very interesting how the application of the law really works in real life, and being able to serve Iowans and take part of this, kind of a front row seat. I didn't know anything about these issues a couple of years ago. I barely knew how any of the law worked when I first got elected. Now I am able to, be where a doctor or a nurse can call me. Yeah, I had an airline pilot down in Davis County in America. This was a big thing. They wanted to do, just like Canada. If you're a Canadian right now, you cannot board a plane unless you're vaccinated. They wanted to do that in America. The big thing was that a lot of airline employees stood up for themselves and said, no, a lot of the accommodation for a religious exemption on United Airlines was unpaid leave. Thankfully, they finally brought all those people back. They put them on unpaid leave because if they fired them, that would have been a civil rights, EEOC complaint. So they put them on unpaid leave as accommodation. Their medical exemptions they paid. So the employees stood up for themselves, and it was risky, because if you're an airline pilot and you want to stand up for your civil rights, but you standing up for your civil rights causes people to miss their flight or be stranded somewhere, it could easily backfire on you, But thankfully, the American people saw what was going on and didn't want to take a vaccine as a requirement for travel, because it's just what we knew about this technology. There really is no scientific basis for it, and that's why it really is on its face kind of discriminatory. Which no one's interested in that discussion anymore. But 6 to 8 months ago, that was a really great discussion. There's still a lot of vaccine information coming out, a lot of Pfizer documents coming out, a lot of really big concerns. But I do anticipate, I think there will be some sort of push for a booster mandate on travel. And there are people that are already wanting this and that would be comfortable with it. We've been acclimated to this idea. The big problem with the vaccine mandate is, one, especially for this illness, the illness affects people differently and the vaccine affects people differently because people are different. So if people are differently affected, why would you have one rule that treats everyone the same? You should have policies that allow everyone to freely express who they truly are as their true identity. and accommodate them. That would be a really wonderful, inclusive society. Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why I'm hesitant to say that COVID is over is because we still don't even know how COVID began. There is not a consensus on what COVID originated from. So this is a SARS-CoV-2, a coronavirus that was found in species of bats. There is a lot of controversy over the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There's a lot of controversy over gain-of-function research grants that had and research projects that had to be moved to the Wuhan laboratory because they were violative of an Obama order prohibiting this gain-of-function research. The gain-of-function research is used in weaponization of pathogens. They are deliberately trying to see and experiment how do viruses become more pathogenic and virulent. Those were the types of experiments that were being conducted in this facility. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and there's a lot of people that have not been fully transparent. So people like, I think it's Dr. Peter Jazak and Ralph Barrick at North Carolina. Americans are involved. This kind of right-wing thing of, oh, this was the China virus. Well, there seems to be some Tar Heel and some American influences also at play here. And then the question is, what else could possibly be lurking in these laboratories? So there's been a lot of discussions about the next pandemic already, and what might that look like, and is it going to be another COVID variant? The limited efficacy of the vaccines that are available is going to be a big concern. There are a lot of scientific concerns that, okay, did this mRNA technology, did it somehow destroy innate immunity? Does it make, how are people going to react when they're exposed to a new COVID variant in the wild, if it is wild or if it is engineered? But anyway, there's a lot of controversy on the SARS-CoV-2 virus itself. It centers around what they call the furin cleavage site. There's a lot of great research on this. And so that's the thing, we don't know how COVID began. The first SARS outbreak in 2003, SARS-1, they had the index case within a month. And that was with the previous generation of technology where it took a lot longer to genomically sequence this. So I would really, really appreciate if the people of the world would have a more clear official understanding of the origins of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID. And we don't have that yet. So we're in the dark. There are a lot of people that I think are up to some nefarious tricks. And that's why people need to drink lots of great water, tell the people they love them, have a joyful life that supports their immune system, get out in the sunshine, take the very basic steps to support your health and become independently healthy, because health can be taken away. And then, well, I haven't even mentioned this statistic yet. I think I told you this before, but our community's ability to respond to illness. So in the event of another COVID outbreak, how is Fairfield going to do? So in 2020, the Jefferson County Health Center had 25 inpatient hospital beds. Now in 2022, we have 17 available beds because staffing has eroded by that much, and all those pressures on the staffing situation. So we're less capable of responding to, a severe illness than we were just 2 years ago, but we're just as vulnerable to severe illness, if not, in my opinion, more vulnerable than we were 2 years ago. So we have very important health metrics trending in the wrong direction that, to me, indicate that we're not out of the woods yet, and every single person has a responsibility to maintain their health, however that looks like and however that works for them.
We talked about some of the biggest challenges that Iowa faces, but what are you most hopeful about? What do you see as being?
There's a lot of people who are embracing this opportunity for growth and recognize that this is an evolutionary jump. And we see this, every 100 years or so, there's cataclysmic events that force humanity into a different direction. I think we're seeing that. I think a lot of the stress and tension is going to be an opportunity to adapt, to evolve, to let go of what's no longer working and learn a new way that works better. I think a lot of that will come from necessity, especially depending on how financial markets shape up or how the food supply chain shapes up. I moved to Fairfield because we really had a strong, vibrant, local agriculture, health-oriented mindset. So even on some of my toughest critics, I still have to say, hey, great job in the garden. You're doing great work, demonstrating how to, really produce a lot of produce for yourself. And so there is a lot of really great things happening in terms of people who are taking responsibility to make the world a better place. And I'm more than willing to do that. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to vote for me. If you're doing something that I think is really good and is benefiting our mutual health, I want to congratulate you. I want to support you. I want to help out. Food and energy is what society runs off of. And food of energy, I think, is going to get harder to come by, more expensive. I think real food is going to be harder to come by, and they're going to introduce a lot of these substitutes like these fake meats or these fillers or these soybean patties or whatever, and they'll texture it to make it taste like meat, but it's really not the same and probably has a lot of inflammatory effects. So that's how even margarine was invented. There was a shortage of butter, so I needed to figure out a substitute. The chemist invented a process to hydrogenate the oil to make margarine, and that was a cheaper butter substitute. So these fake foods that cause a lot of health concerns, they typically are introduced when real foods are in short supply. So yeah, food and energy, that's what I want to invest in locally. That's what I encourage everyone, that we don't all have to agree on issues. We don't have to agree on my position that you shouldn't install menstrual products in the boys' restroom, but we do have to agree that we have to survive the winter and be fed hopefully every day, except when we're hopefully collectively engaging in fasting practices in accordance with everyone's religious liberty, not imposed by the state, of course. So I think that's the big thing, that I think society is going to look very different. I think the world looks very different now than it did in 2019. I think as the world progresses, I think we could see some things that will jar and force people to reconsider their priorities and where they place their values and make adjustments. And the more we can meet these challenges with maturity, with a truthful self-awareness and reflection, I think those people will prosper and will succeed and do a great thing. If for people who are locked into a lie, for people that don't want to take responsibility, who believe that the federal government is somehow capable of managing finances, those people are going to be in a lot of pain.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned to you off camera, and, I just want to let our listeners know that I wanted to offer you a very level playing field and a platform today that, the invitation for other candidates to come on the show and talk about their platform and their values is totally welcome. And I'm just curious if there's, what else we want to cover today? Like, did we get to all of the points that you wanted to raise?
Well, something did trigger me on your recent episode, this distinction between the separation of church and state and America being a Christian nation. So this is where I get frustrated, where people who do have a lot of strong and loud opinions, in my opinion or my perspective, don't always and again, this goes back to what are we talking about? These words that we say have specific meanings, and if we don't agree on that meaning, it's going to be very difficult to communicate. If we can't communicate, society breaks down. So that's why having agreed upon definitions, such as the word woman, where the word woman means the same thing at all times. So I had an educator tell me that the term woman depends on the context. So I said, okay, in what context are you not a woman? And she didn't really have an answer for that. No, you're a woman at all times, because the word woman has a specific definition. That definition applies at all times. And because we agree on that definition, that makes it possible to communicate. So the idea of separation of church and state, and that, people shouldn't be regulating abortion. The First Amendment has what's called the Establishment Clause that prevents the official state establishment of a religion. So this would mean the state of Iowa could not force you to pray. It cannot force you to take a fasting holiday. It cannot force you to tithe to construct a church. It can't force you to any sort of religious observance. So that's the Establishment Clause. Then there's the free exercise of religion, that the government should not do anything to prevent the free exercise of religion. So those are very sacred constitutional protections that I think undergird freedom in this country. The problem is the word nation. So nation refers to the people. State refers to the government. The state is the institution which can use violence against you. So that's different than the people. So a people, we have a national identity, and a lot of people adopt, they're Christians, and they call themselves Americans, they call themselves Christians, and a lot of them link the two. A lot of the people who were involved in the founding of this country for a number of years were predominantly the Christian faith. So there's no problem with people organizing along their own religious lines to have the government create laws that they want and have their values reflected in law, as long as the government does not officially establish any religious observance. But I would argue that the way that a lot of these COVID protocols were adopted, with the moralizing of, you have to take a vaccine because it's the right thing to do, you have to wear a mask because it protects others and it's moral, I would argue that's a sincerely set of beliefs that are emblematic of a religion that the government is imposing and forcing people to comply with. So religion essentially means just sincerely held beliefs that are consistently lived. And again, there's lots of interesting ways to apply this, and it's always a two-way street. So I think the biggest frustration is we don't have the same common understanding of these things, that my understanding of critical race theory is very different than someone else's, and therefore communication is impossible. My idea of what the word woman is very different than what someone else means the word woman, so therefore communication is going to be impossible. So we need to agree on definitions and terms. Nation means the people, the state means the actual mechanisms of enforcing violence within any given jurisdiction. Yeah, I think just Fairfield's been such a wonderful opportunity it is a community of growth, and it really provides a lot of great things and a great quality of life. I think the biggest challenges affecting our district is going to be demographics. We have an older population, and we're not able to maintain our housing. We're not able to provide care for our children because of all these workforce shortages. So we really have a big aging population, not enough young people. So we have a lot of big demographic challenges. That's why I think the state of Iowa should take a role in encouraging strong families, young families, making sure that, if we want to keep living in Iowa, we need to, keep people in Iowa, and we need to create people because, so that's, I say, the biggest thing really that I've noticed is these demographic shifts. And that affects the schools, because when there's less kids in school, there's less of a state appropriation, and that's going to affect the budgets. Same thing with the hospitals as well. Rural Iowa has a lot of challenges with some critical access hospitals. There's a lot of other pressures that are making those difficult, in addition to some of the staffing things we've talked about. So there are a lot of serious concerns that, are there people able to maintain all the social functions that we rely on, and making sure we have strong, steady population growth, and that we can have a community of like this far into the future, and really just making sure that our children have the very same blessings now that we had growing up. And the world's very different, and that's changed because I never once, I always took for granted that I'd always have a school to go to, or that I'd always be able to, play my summer sports. And those were things we took for granted, and they were taken away from children. And I think that was a bad decision, and I want to make sure it never happens again, because I think we have a lot of data now that shows that it caused more harm than benefit. That would be my general premise when we looked at how these COVID things played out. Even Bill Gates was saying similar things, that we overestimated the virus. We didn't tailor policy to the populations that were most affected. And that's, again, the problem with mandates, and the problem with hysterical fear, and the problem with people who their fear drives them to force others to feel the fear that they fear. That's really all it is, just emotional projection. I'm feeling afraid, so I'm doing this, and you need to accommodate my fear. You need to feel the fear that I'm feeling. And so that's kind of how I just kind of perceive these energetic, resonance or dissonance or whatever, and how these things actually do progress in society, because it's a lot of social enforcement, as I think as you might have experienced the last time. And thank you so much, Luke, that you were able to provide a forum for me that was immensely valuable, and did turn, as you said yourself, one of your more most watched podcasts. So, and it's amazing that people thought that that we're giving you a hard time for that. So I'm just immediately so grateful for what you've created here, and this wonderful table you've put together, and just the opportunity for everyone to be heard. I think that is something that human beings really need right now. That's what we've been trying to create at the Phoenix Rising Hall. So anyone wants to come join us for lunch, and then there's a community open mic where basically you can say whatever you want. The guidelines is hopefully it's kind of uplifting, and if you upset the crowd, they'll let you know about it. But you could try to come and say all the things you dislike about me, and you'd get a lot of you'd probably get a lot of interesting conversations going. But we're welcome to do that, because everyone, as a part of, their human health, needs to be heard, because everyone's voice is significant, and everyone needs to know that your voice is significant. If you have something to say, I want to provide a venue for you to say it, no matter what it is, no matter how uncomfortable it makes me. If it's true to you, just express it, and we'll figure out what happens next. But, human expression, being heard, is another thing that is kind of missing in society. And this idea of genuine human connection, coming together in community, that is a big luxury that a lot of people are desperate for, and finding it harder to find.
Jeff, really grateful for you being on the show, and your willingness to just express your ideas and opinions. And
it's always a pleasure, Luke. I really appreciate everything you've done, and congratulations on the continued success of the show. I'm glad you're hammering away on it. I hope we provided something interesting and entertaining for your audience today. And again, I appreciate you saying I'm accessible. I do truly want to have these conversations with everyone, because I think we all can learn a lot from each other.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks for listening, you guys. We'll see you next time. Over and out.